Okay, real good. Looks like the gang's all here. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our panel on disaster preparedness and response. Our panel discussion today has taken a long time to come to fruition. We've been looking to have this panel discussion for several months now, dating all the way back to CalCAPA's last annual conference. So we're very pleased to have with us today two of our agencies in California that do outstanding work in the areas of disaster preparedness and response, and in their own ways. And I'll let them speak to the specifics of their situations. But to do that, from the Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County, Paulina Moreno is here with us, and she has a presentation, and we'll answer questions about the programs in Santa Cruz. And then from the Community Action Program of Sonoma County is Cynthia King, and then she'll provide us some information there as well. Maria Elena de la Garza is here in support of Paulina in Santa Cruz, and as are a number of folks that are in the audience today. So thank you all for being here. With me from our organization is Katrina Ruiz. She is our deputy director. Katrina, do you have a couple of words for our group today, getting into the panel discussion?
Yes, thank you everybody for being here. As Lawrence mentioned, I am the Deputy Director here at CalCAPA, and my focus is advocacy, legislation, and impact, and how we can improve that. And knowing that a lot of folks faced disaster throughout the state of California last year, this conversation is a long time coming and very important. Thank you to the board members that are here as well. David should be joining us pretty shortly. But nonetheless, thank you for being here. And I will hand it off to Jordan, who is our communications and events coordinator here at CalCAPA.
Hi, all. Sorry, I was finishing my last bite of lunch. My name is Jordan Cox, and I'm the communications event coordinator.
Thanks, Jordan. Okay, so today, sort of the format of our panel, our panelists will have brief presentations on what it is that they're doing at their agencies, and we'll open up for an opportunity for discussion. This is obviously a meeting format, so you have options of either asking questions in chat, or if you'd be so kind as to raise your hand, we'll call on you and you can come off of mute to ask questions that way. And Paulina, how are we looking? You want to start us off?
Yeah, thank you so much, Lawrence. And I'm really happy to see so many familiar faces. There's a lot of people from our team, and so I want to say thank you, not just to my team, of course, but everyone that is joining us this afternoon. I think it's a very timely conversation around disaster impacts and how, as community action agencies, we can take lead, and how specifically this afternoon what I will share is how CAB Santa Cruz County responded to one of the most devastating disaster climate impacts that happened last year. In fact, you know, we are celebrating 1 year after the floods that pretty much left our community and Pájaro underwater. So I do have a little presentation that I do want to share. I think pictures speak 1,000 words, and so I want to share with you all as I'm narrating and sharing some of the context behind those community members that were impacted. And again, this is our story. This is our response. And I welcome, you know, the team to use the chat if there are things that I missed. Because many of you were the ones that were on the front lines. And then I know Maria Elena will be here to support and share anything I may have missed. But I apologize, I don't think I introduced myself. My name is Paulina Moreno. I am the Director of Special Projects at Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County. I get the privilege for the last couple of years to respond to the crisis. And when we say crisis, it has been honestly beyond climate. It has been around COVID, making sure that our community is not only informed, but informed in their own language, which in our case oftentimes means not just Spanish, but also responding to the indigenous community that we serve in our county, in Mixteco, Triqui, and making sure that we're getting communication out to them. And let me see, you think that I have this by now. Let me know, are you able to see the PowerPoint? Because now when I share, I don't get to see folks. Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna assume yes, because I can't see people. But again, I'm from Community Action Board, Santa Cruz County. Very briefly, I'm gonna share just a little bit about our agency, you know, our mission, of course, to partner with the community to eliminate poverty, create social change through advocacy and essential services. We operate a number of programs. Again, I'm the director that oversees special projects, which has in the last couple of years really morphed to respond to emergency crisis around floods, around fires, around COVID. But we operate a number of programs, and for the last years, we have been working very hard to build relationships in the communities that we serve, because we are from the community. And so I want to transition to share a little bit about the floods, if you were not, just to give some context, right? And as I mentioned, March 11th marked the 1-year anniversary where, you know, we received heavy rains and our Pájaro River levee breached right around midnight, which actually resulted in extensive flooding throughout Pájaro. This meant, you know, that it obviously caused extensive flooding, damaging numerous homes, numerous businesses, causing unsafe sewer and drinking water conditions, setting local harvest seasons back, and causing enough flooding at Pájaro Middle School that to this day, students have to attend another middle school in Watsonville. Pájaro, if you don't know, is a small, disadvantaged community, mostly Latino, indigenous, mostly low-income farm workers. You know, if you were to ask members of Pájaro, they would largely tell you that they have for years felt ignored by state and local officials. And I think that the flooding really cast a spotlight on decades of inequity in this agricultural region where, again, majority migrant farm workers have long been marginalized. You know, I don't know if you know, but this week is the National Farm Worker Awareness Week. And so I hope some of you were able to participate in yesterday's amazing NCAP presentation to you know, contribute to share a little bit about the work of Cesar Chavez and the work that community action agencies across are working towards. But, you know, I want to share that if you have ever eaten a strawberry, if you have ever, you know, for those of you that enjoy green smoothies or things like that, I bet that strawberry came from the Pájaro Valley. This is an area where, again, a lot of harvest, but we recognize that without urgent government intervention and investments, the immigrant farm workers who pick these berries and food that we get to enjoy could very much become climate migrants. Many of our community members that we work with lack the legal status and therefore are ineligible for federal disaster funds or unemployment insurance. And those, you know, they struggle to feed themselves, their families, and one of the most expensive and under-resourced agricultural communities in the US. And so here I'm sharing a couple of pictures around the devastation that happened in Pájaro. And I think it's important to highlight, you know, a lot of the members that are joining us this afternoon are actually part of the team that responded to to the evacuation. This is one of our staff members, Leonor Mendoza, who on March 11th, the day of the evacuation, participated in a press conference that for the very first time, as far as we know, is the very first time that a press conference was issued, not only in Spanish and English, but in Mixteco. And it was important for us to be there. You know, we are recipients for the last year. We're part of the California Trusted Messenger Network around Listos, California, which is an effort to make sure that all Californians are aware of how to prepare in case of a disaster. And so our team has been doing this work on the ground, working with community members, giving presentations. And so it made sense that when the evacuation order was issued, that our team responded immediately and were on the ground offering interpretation, offering direction to many of the community members. This is again pictures of our team that were part of doing some responding to the need in the community, which was largely around sandbags and making sure that folks had enough of them. I have no idea how many I know Maria Elena has a number of how many sandbags they were able to put together, but you know, this again was part of our efforts to respond to the immediate need in preparation right before it got really bad. These are some of our day workers and some of our team members that also participated. But I do want to share that, you know, during the impact around the floods was extensive. And one of the things that we particularly took lead on was making sure that we were working with county and local community partners to respond to the emergency needs. And when I say emergency needs, I'm talking about the coordination of resources. During that time, there were a lot of well-intentioned folks wanting to give and donate to people who were having to evacuate their homes. You know, we know that roughly around 10,000 people were evacuated from Pájaro, and there were 5 emergency shelters that had been opened. And the one that our team took lead on was the one in the Santa Cruz County Fairgrounds, which is actually here in Watsonville. There were more than 600 individuals in that shelter being housed for, I want to say, over 65 days. And this is some of our team members that responded on site, on the ground, really very grassroots. I remember one of our directors, I believe, went to go purchase some vests for our team members to be able to self-identify, because one of the greatest needs was not having enough interpreters for the community. There was a lot of folks from the county, there were folks from Cal OES, there were folks from the state, but unfortunately, language was definitely a barrier that resulted in a lot of misinformation, in a lack of access to some of those donations that folks were issuing. And so our team was there not only to help organize. I know a couple of my team members here really took charge and organized schedules around meals, organized schedules around picking up donations from all the donations that were getting donated to the shelter, organizing just resources, doing intakes with the community members to assess need and what it was that they needed support with. And these were all done in Spanish, Mixteco, and you know, and really the team was helping in every form at the shelter. Here, you know, is sorting of donations, putting together food, and making sure, again, that the information that we were listening to from the county in terms of you know, safety around when it was okay to go back home, when it was okay to, you know, drink the water, that we were creating those messages in order to provide the community with what they needed. We created a number of, you know, just communications around what the county was providing, again, because there was a lack of communication, not only in Spanish, but in indigenous languages. And so our team really made an effort to launch into communication and make sure that Text messages were going out to our participants, that we were recording videos, that we were updating them on our social media platforms, and that information was getting out in their native language. I do want to say, that the result of that really became a collaboration with the state in these last couple of months. We are actually one of the organizations that was selected to work with the undocumented community after Governor Newsom's announcement that $95 million would be issued to undocumented folks in community members who, as we know, were not eligible for any FEMA assistance, were not eligible for unemployment, are not eligible for any of the safety nets that other individuals have access to. We are one of 17, I believe 17 or 20 organizations across the state issuing the storm assistance emergency relief funding. And this is the team behind the scenes that gets to do all that. And, proudly, we want to say that in the last month, since June to December and beginning of January, the team issued out more than $9 million back to the community. And this is across Santa Cruz County, not just Pájaro, but across Santa Cruz County. And more recently, we were issued additional funding by one of our senators that knows our work, that knows we have the infrastructure, that we have the trust in the community, that knows that we are connecting with those that are most disadvantaged, less connected to resources. We were allowed to move forward another $400,000 to community members. And as you can see, the impact is huge. And so that's just a little bit. I know I'm trying to be conscious of time, but I don't know, Maria Elena, if you wanted to add anything else.
I thank you, Paulina. That was a really good start. And I'll wait after Cynthia's presentation. I'd like to have an opportunity to share a little bit about the advocacy work, the behind the scenes advocacy work that we engaged in and wanted to share that experience. If that's okay, Lawrence?
Yeah, by all means, Maria Elena, that I appreciate you waiting a little bit for that discussion, but it sounds good. And if you have questions for Paulina, I encourage you to drop them into the chat. We'll open up for questions after all the presentations are done so we can come off mute and ask them out loud. And I do want to give a little space for Cynthia. So Cynthia, without much further ado, what's going on in Sonoma in and around disaster preparedness and response?
Hi, everybody. I appreciate being here today. I was wondering, I saw lots of you are here from CAB, which is great. For those who are not from CAB, how many of you have done disaster response or recovery? I know I saw Butte, so I figured you did, Tim. Anybody else? I just want to get a sense of it. So I'm speaking today for Community Action Partnership Sonoma County, but part of my perspective comes from when I was working with CAP as a partner when I was at Catholic Charities of Santa Rosa. And so that, informs my knowledge and understanding of Sonoma County's work in disasters, which is extensive. So this was 2017. I don't know if you can think that's blocking the number, but we had a massive firestorm in Sonoma, Napa, Mendocino, and Lake County in 2017. This little red box is here because of a perspective of a later photo. So just keep that in mind. This is a center of this neighborhood, which is called Coffee Park. And this was the park itself. But there's 5,000 homes that were burned in one night, in a few hours. And but this neighborhood is always kind of used as the example of just how striking it was. And I know for me, driving through here afterwards and seeing so many of the fireplaces and patio furniture sitting there, but nothing else, and a lot of cars, it felt like it had been bombed. Like that was sort of the visceral emotional experience for a lot of us, even if we didn't lose a home, that our community had been bombed and was lost. And so that was a big space to come back from to rebuild. So 24 people died that year in that fire, 5,300 homes, and it was 5% of just the housing inventory in the city of Santa Rosa. largest number of homes lost. This is 2017 data, so that might not be true anymore. And at that time, the 7.5 billion in property claims was the worst FEMA disaster at that time, and it was 75% of the statewide wildfire damage that year. This is two views of it. The Tubbs fire is here, and then there's the Nuns fire, and then another fire in Napa. They were all happening at the same time and burned for about 2 weeks. And it covered 4 counties. So my perspective of Catholic Charities Santa Rosa was we served all 4 of those counties. And so I respond was part of the response for all of these. What's striking most about Tubbs is that, sorry, in my reveal, it started at 10:30 up here where this little symbol is, and was all the way down here into the city area by 3 a.m. So it was at one point, I can never remember this exactly, it was something like a football field every few seconds was how fast it was moving because of the wind that night. And the response, the Sonoma County did not have a coordinated response like it does now, but it was, there was a lot of bad decisions made, there's a lot of poor infrastructure. So there was a lot of driving door to door in the fire, trying to get people out by the sheriff and others. This is surprisingly the best picture I could find of Coffey Park today. It is, I think, 100% rebuilt. This is the park that was redone as well. And so I just wanted to quickly talk through the journey of getting there. It is what, 7 years, and we're still rebuilding in some places. Up here in Fountain Grove is the kind of bigger, fancier homes, and there's a number of them that are still being rebuilt, but they were all taken out in the same night. So I know this is a lot. On the left here, these are the initial goals of our long-term recovery group, because we basically spent a couple weeks just shell-shocked, meeting with the FEMA rep, trying to wrap our heads around, understand anything about what was happening and what was supposed to be done, other than just meeting immediate needs, of which there was plenty of issues, like what you were mentioning with CAB. There was issues around bilingual access in Spanish, feeling safe, feeling like those who are non-citizens could go, and to a safe place, to a evacuation shelter. People would hide out on the coast. There was just a lot of isolation and segregated responses. So as we learned about the FEMA model and started to implement the long-term recovery group, it was called Rebuilding Our Community. Community Action Partnership was a core member of that group in getting it started. We actually rented out additional space and created a recovery center that became a core part of the community-facing recovery for several years. All of these organizations in the logos, except for Catholic Charities USA, these were all of the core case management partners. And one of the things that I've always found really striking about this is that the religious aspect of service and connection that created the ability to provide case management to the community. So Zushi is a Buddhist service organization. They're entirely volunteer-based. There was a person who left their job in Silicon Valley and came and worked full-time as a case manager for 2 years as a volunteer. Jewish Community Free Clinic, Catholic Charities, and then Salvation Army all had case management and financial assistance that they provided, both collecting from the network, similar network, Community Action, and then from larger donors. And Catholic Charities USA was really important because they have an annual disaster institute, basically, and it's open to anybody. And it just happened a couple weeks after the 2017 fires, so a whole group of us went to it, and it really helped us inform how we developed our model of service and case management beyond just what FEMA tells you, which can be very unclear and confusing. And then a DocuFund was a separate fund started for those who are undocumented and experienced disaster and would not get FEMA assistance. And so that was another source of funds that we were able to take advantage of. So we did start the Rebuilding Our Community, or our long-term recovery group, out of the VOAD, Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. But our VOAD was fairly tepid at the time. We hadn't had a disaster. All of our federal disasters had been floods up until that point. And so it wasn't a really robust VOAD like you would hope for to organize your response. And then we did move forward with creating the bylaws and the structure, and with this in mind, that the purpose of it is to overlap the individual need with the government and local funds and services and that sort of thing to get the unmet needs part of getting that last 10% of the house built, right? Getting the furniture in because they spent all of that on the rebuild, but whatever it was that each case needed to be complete and closed. So this is fine, right? It doesn't really tell you much though. It's just a general idea. And for me, doing case management, we had responded to Catholic Charities a little bit to the 2015 Valley Fire, which was a very quick and fast fire that had a lot of damage, but not in the same scope. But seeing the fumbling with case management with that, and working with somebody who was from Lake County on building a more robust and powerful disaster case management program, one of the first things I always default to when I'm unclear on things is creating a diagram. So I worked on this because it just wasn't making sense in my head. And we had all these different organizations who were trying to figure out how to do this together, but to do the same things and to use the same resources, but do it in our own places. FEMA did award a disaster case management grant to Catholic Charities California, who then subcontracted to Catholic Charities Santa Rosa. But it was the very first FEMA disaster case management grant for fire. So everybody who was coming in who had experience with this was coming in from a perspective of floods, like muck and gut, make it safe, and then move on, right? It wasn't a whole neighborhood has been decimated and we have to build from the ground up. So there was a lot of co-learning as we implemented this. So this was for me a way to just make sure, like, okay, we all worked on this. So I worked on this with my predecessor, the ED of CAP Sonoma, Susan Cooper at the time. I actually just built a lot of deep relationships with CAP folks. And learned a lot about CAP. I didn't know as much about at the time, and this was a great way to do that. So we took this is the whole long-term recovery process, like how somebody comes in by the fires, what they need immediately, what their actual damage for the long term is, and then whether or not they need case management or just some short-term assistance, and then working them all the way through. And this was really helpful in terms of building a shared system. And it came in really handy because we had 3 more fires. I'm trying to remember. I think it was more than 3, but these are the federal fires. So the next year, so this huge fire had a huge impact, lots of national awareness, and then Camp Fire happened the next year. And so that was, even more so the whole town. But the smoke came, this was just 1 year later, like you guys were talking about Santa Cruz, and it brought all of this, not just the smoke and closing down the schools and not being able to do anything again, but the vicarious trauma of bringing it back, triggering. The next year we had floods, and then the Kincaid fire, which wasn't as bad as it could have been. They were worried it was going to go all the way to the coast. So they evacuated 250,000 people from our county in the course of, I think, 8 hours. This time the system had been set up in place that we were all organized. They had zones, everybody would do it without massive backup and panic, but it was a huge impact on the community to have so many people having to leave at the same time. We left and went to my brother's house in Oakland and stayed there for 5 days, and came back and then immediately started using all the same tools again, the local assistance center, the long-term recovery group, the DCM, but now it was getting all put together in the same place. And so we have, and this was true mostly with the pandemic and not exactly the same with DCM, but we had a fire that year too with the lockdown, and then the floods in 2022. All of that became the same long-term recovery group, basically, with kind of pullouts for the DCM of who was getting which funding or services, but we couldn't have multiple long-term recovery groups happening. And so the outcome of what the system that was put in place was, at the same time we were doing the disaster case management for 2017 fires, we got a grant from the state for LISOS, which I heard Kev mention. And we were able to use that funding to invest it in the VOAD at the time. And we called it, we now call it COAD, Community Organizations Active in Disaster, to set up that infrastructure so that we were ready to respond. And when you have an active COAD or VOAD, the long-term recovery group unfolds from that. And so you have all of these organizations who have already put in the time and energy to organize together ahead of time. And so rebuilding our community, moved in under COAD for management, and we developed a really strong relationship with the new Department of Emergency Management with Sonoma County. And the efforts through that were so impactful that we actually now, COED has a designated place in the Emergency Operations Center. So rather than the human services and social services organizations being an afterthought or a, here's the really important work, and then now you guys clean up, we're actually there in the center and turn to as like, how can you guys help with this situation? You know, like really integrated into the response. And that was a huge win for us, to be seen for the value of all the organizations together and the impact we can have, especially in a coordinated way. And then Community Action Partnership, Sonoma County is the fiscal sponsor to Sonoma County COED. And so that happened about a year after we really started rebuilding it and starting the governance and identifying a budget, looking for funding. And then we were able to take them on as a fiscal sponsor, and they still are today. So that's had an important impact in our role. But for better or for worse, I'm actually going to stop sharing. One of the problems when you fiscally sponsor an organization and you're part of it is there's this risk of conflation. And so like last year with the floods, the county gave COED the response funding for the assistance. And that was the first time that happened. But COED doesn't have infrastructure to actually provide services. So it was really the Community Action Partnership folks who were providing the direct assistance with getting the money out. But then when it went in the paper, it was COED and Catholic Charities are doing all this great work in the community. And so it was a little bit like, hey, remember, you got to like make sure they know, just so that it's something that we can also keep doing. But that was that was our only fiscal sponsorship at the time. It's actually something we're kind of looking at expanding in general as a way to support similar initiatives that are about bringing the community together to align efforts and be more impactful. Another piece of all of this was building a data system, right? That we were not all entering our data in separate places and then trying to bring it back together, because that happened. And we had a data person we were able to bring out Catholic Charities. And the first time everybody shared their data their data for their financial assistance, it took 3 weeks to try to clean it up and match everybody, right? Because nobody was collecting the same information. So we built with efforts to outcomes, we built a whole case management data system. And so every fire that's happened in California since then, Catholic Charities California continues to receive the FEMA disaster case management grants. And they have adopted and are using that same system for data management and case management tracking, you know, moving everything from the assessment, the triage assessment to the recovery plan. And we also created a whole 5-day training for the disaster case managers and have supported other communities. I think it was Butte actually that we went up to and provided some support in their disaster case management training, because it's a very intensive process, and a lot of people get hired for it and then don't have necessarily the support or the skills to be able to follow that whole process that goes with it. And then I think also each disaster, there's less and less resources donated in. So there's less to work with in terms of the unmet needs and how we respond. But basically now we just have a crisis response program, and we're just keeping it there to place in our budget and our structure. And then when the next disaster happens, because we know it will, we just activate it. And then we have staff who move from whatever the program they're in into the crisis response program as they go out in the community and do the work. And so then any funds that come in would also go into that program, because I've also seen at 3 agencies now, like trouble tracking donations that come in through disasters, because you're not really ready for it always. And so having a way to be really clear, this is for this disaster and for this output versus the regular programs we do day to day. That's it.
All right, real good. And hopefully some folks have questions here. While you're thinking of them, I'll pose one to start things off. Cynthia, you were just talking about some of the funding efforts that were helping to support what happens when you go out to respond. So I'll pose this to both groups. What are some of the key funding elements that you pay attention to in your preparedness side? You know, how do you get yourself ready to be able to respond from a financial perspective?
Do you want to answer, Carolina or Maria-Elena?
I think with the funding, I might need some assistance from Maria Elena. Maria Elena, do you want to help out on this one?
So funding is a tricky thing. And I just had a response to your pictures, Cynthia. So forgive me as I stumble through this answer. You know, one of the challenging things for our response before or during the last flooding, that there were not mechanisms in place. There were not regional mechanisms in place to address a disaster that happens over the bridge from Santa Cruz County, but in a different county, right? And those community residents come to Santa Cruz County for support. And so that continues to create challenging situations in funding for disaster response when it's outside of the normal county that you reside in for us. So I'm curious as to the opportunities for community action statewide is how do we begin to build a response that is regional so that we flush those funding challenges before we are dealing with an emergency. And so that's how it felt to us. The emergency happened, we jumped in, we did what we needed to do, and there were not agreements in place for reimbursement of services. So that is real. How about you, Cynthia?
Absolutely. I mean, especially in 2017, but each iteration became an additional one where they want you to show up, but they're not necessarily expecting to pass on funding, right? That this volunteer, that's why we changed it to COAD, right? Because it's not all volunteer organizations, it's community organizations who are critical, but need to be part of the funded response. I did find that the Catholic Charities Network has developed some great responses. The Catholic Charities California is able to advocate, right, for the disaster award or the funding and then receive the pass-through so they can go to multiple counties at once. It's more efficient. But Catholic Charities USA, like I said, they have a disaster institute, but they also to get donations, right, for their disaster response program. And so as soon as a disaster happens, they will allocate $10,000 to that agency, which isn't that much, right? But at least funds a couple of days of response without thinking about how you're going to pay for it. Yeah. It makes it a little bit of a cushion. And I would love to see National CAP do something like that. I was at an event they did, it was at the Catholic Charities USA headquarters, right? So I know there's a relationship there, and I think there's a lot of potential with that. The other piece was Santa Rosa, Catholic Charities Santa Rosa was a regional agency. Salvation Army is a regional agency. Like, I think having the understanding of those partnerships of what the capacity is for each organization, of like who your partners would be, and then having, oh, I can't think of the term right now, when you exchange, right, resources like workers. Shared, it's like a shared response. It'll come to me probably right after the sentence. But there's a way to have that in place as well. That, like, you know, something happens to you, you're in the middle of a disaster. You don't necessarily have workers who can do it because maybe their homes are flooded. So Community Action Sonoma sends workers to you to provide those services, and then likewise, you know, if we have another disaster, like, I think the Community Action Network can really build something strong around that.
Absolutely. If I can also add, one of the outcomes because of the challenges, we now have $100,000 MOU in place with the County of Santa Cruz to activate services as needed. But I will tell you that one of the lessons learned, especially because of the back-to-back, right? COVID and then fires and then floods and then river, right? Is we really outlined our role in emergency response. And we outlined that by asking ourselves, what does CAB uniquely offer in this community? And so I ask you to ask yourself, what does your agency uniquely offer in your community, right? For us, we know what it is, right? We knew we had language expertise. We knew we were a trusted partner with segments of the community that do not trust government usually. We knew that we had wonderful outreach staff, and many of them are on this call. Thank you. And we knew that we had an infrastructure ready since COVID for the disbursement of economic relief immediately to the community. So we have an MOU in place in Santa Cruz County. Pajaro is in another county. There is no MOU that exists yet. And we also have an MOU, an agreement and an MOU in place with our Community Foundation of Santa Cruz County. And that money drops within 24 hours of the emergency, right? It's a phone call away. That is a small one, but it gets us going in the right direction. And I think the second outcome that what lessons learned in this work is we now have an internal plan for how we're going to respond based on what we know we offer, right? What we can offer, including if an emergency happens over this weekend, we have who's going to lead, who are the staff who have volunteered to pivot services. So we have an internal plan that didn't exist before the floods. We were scrambling, we were trying to figure out, we did the best that we could. This team, and I want to just say this team, rolled up their sleeves and got out there, and they saved and responded to the community in a beautiful and impactful way. And now we have a plan. We have a better plan internally for our agency with some of our external partners, and we have a lot more work to do because this is beyond Santa Cruz County, right? You know, Cynthia, you talked about being in 3 different regions. This is an opportunity, CalCAPA. This is an opportunity statewide community action to position ourselves, to gather the lessons learned, to share those lessons and that infrastructure, and then to go after funding.
Yeah, because we're going to be involved one way or the other, right? I mean, it's just, it's the more we plan for it. So I wanted to say that community foundations, I think, have played a critical role, and they've been learning from each other. So like you were saying, Maria Elena, in Napa, that Napa Community Foundation did that after the earthquake. They had a group of organizations they funded to help with the recovery. So when the fire happened, they immediately funded those same organizations because they already had a contract with them, and that was really effective. And so Sonoma has now also adopted that, and I think that funding piece is a key part of that planning. I also recommend FEMA resources for that kind of planning, that just the basic like 101 in terms of like structure and roles and how to move into that more like authoritative structure of response is helpful. And we're adding that that pivot piece for disasters into our job description for those positions where that's part of it, is that like this is what your role is being a disaster versus just sort of having people switch one day to the next.
Excellent.
I wanted to add, because I think as CalCAPA also has an opportunity to be part of that larger statewide network around Listos, right? I think that thankfully, when the floods happened, you know, we were a recipient of that. And so that gave us the leverage to be able to pivot our entire team to respond, because it was directly, you know, related to the work that we were already funded to do. And so, and also talking to our funders, many of them, you know, we had smaller grants, again, and I'm specifically talking about special projects department, having to talk to funders, and, you know, just, I was really amazed at how so many of some of the funders were just so incredibly open to listening to the work that we were doing. I remember, you know, the Latino Community Foundation, we had a grant right around that time. There was a big report due, and they said, you know what, don't worry about submitting a written report. Let's do an interview and share all the work that you've been doing. And so I think it's part of that is building that leverage and relationship with the funders in order to be able to pivot when we need to, and be able to you know, just redirect our team to respond, because as Cynthia mentioned, as Maria Elena mentioned, we are going to do the work no matter what. And so how do we find creative ways to already be funded by those systems that provide us with those resources and leverage to educate the community, right? So we were already doing a lot of education around disaster preparedness. And this reemphasized sort of the need around why we need to, you know, sign up people for emergency alerts. And we're learning, right? We're learning what worked and what didn't. We're learning that, you know, those alerts may not always get to every single community member. We're actually about to launch a survey with the community in Pájaro to understand what were those systems that worked, and what were some of the things that we need to learn from so that we can, again, be best prepared next time.
I see your question, Cynthia. I'll try to Google that link. I can send it. I have the actual summary of that bill. It's AB 1786. It is being introduced, and we just got invited to testify in Sacramento. I'm not sure what the timeline is to help support this. So Assemblyman Rodriguez, I think is he Coachella? Is he from your area, Paulina? I can't remember what area he's from, maybe the Central Valley, but he came, we've been working very closely with him since he came to visit the Pajaro Valley. This bill is for future emergencies, right? Not for past emergencies, but future emergencies, and have really taken in consideration some of the lessons learned, the challenges and the hiccups that we have faced because of the regional stuff, because how the economic assistance has come down through legislation. And they listen to us. They listen to the community-based organizations, and they formulated this assembly bill. And so I can share it through an email, unless Katrina or somebody can help me find Google the link before the webinar is over.
I'll look right now, and if but I'll definitely follow up with folks.
Thank you for that information, Maria Elena. That's really helpful, and obviously we're moving this forward as a network as best we can, and it takes us all to do that. Does anybody have any questions for the panel?
Or shared experience.
Yes, thank you, Maria Elena. I was looking for that too. Or do you do disaster work in your area that you might relate your experience to this?
I had a question for Paulina and for Cynthia. Can you share a little bit about the actual services you did on the ground? What did you and your team do on the ground? What services did you pivot to? I'm curious about that.
Well, at the time I was the director of the department that did a lot of basic needs services. So we had a food program, we had a financial stability program, we had a health and nutrition and housing counseling. And so we just took a lot of that and then applied it. So the local assistance center, we brought food, and we integrated the financial stability assessments into the case management assessment, so that it's not just like, not surviving, not getting people their basic needs, but really helping them move into this new recovery in their lives and thriving. And so the case management in the assessment identified all those different areas of need, right, around the financial knowledge and skills and assets, and the clothing and the replacement and the insurance and just everything they'd have to think about. And so when they identified all of that, we would provide services internally and then refer to partners to meet all of those different needs. We also had an immigration and housing program at the agency at the time, and tied that into the response as well.
I think for us, a lot of the work, and I'm looking to my team because I see so many of the faces that were on the ground. Prior to, we were on notice for evacuation since January, since before the levee breached. And so a lot of these team members, as you saw pictures of them, doing sandbags, going door to door, giving out information to the community, talking with them about the difference. There's very different nuanced language around what is a warning versus what is, there's all kinds of different systems, and the community doesn't necessarily understand which to prioritize. And so one of the things is that the team worked with the city to do a lot of door-to-door, a lot of education, a lot of text messaging that went out. We've been working very hard since COVID to build our database to be able to get the information out to the community. And we noticed that text message has been one of those great resources to get communication out. And so making sure that communication was going out in a timely manner. In terms of, really having to pivot and pivot, some team members here were actually, for the entire duration of when the shelter was open, they were there every single day, getting to know the families, working with them, creating activities for the children, creating schedules, because there was a lack of just organizing within the shelter. There is a lack of organizing that, you know, people didn't know when meals would be coming in. And so the team took it upon themselves to really just take leadership and create schedules, go around and let people know when things, you know, when meals were ready, when new donations came in, did assessments to ensure that they were getting the clothes that they needed in the size that they needed. You know, many of these team members would report back every single week, really devastating stories of, you know, some families in the shelter that had been there for maybe a week or 2 weeks and were still wearing the same clothes that they came in with. You know, families that had toddlers and didn't have somewhere to put them at night, families that were leaving the shelter without a car seat. And so there was just a lot of communication that this team did and took leadership in. And just to ensure that the day-to-day operations in the shelter that was actually in our county, in Santa Cruz County, was functioning. And you know, post floods, we've been doing a lot of on-the-ground work with getting emergency backpacks ready for families, you know, and talking with them again about the importance of, you know, documents. And some of this team member have actually helped people recover some documents because many, you know, folks, due to the floods, didn't have enough time to be able to get their things together. And so there was documents lost, there were things that were important for them, and some of these team members have been able to help them recover that.
I added one more question in the chat. Can I ask it, Lawrence?
Right before you do, I also dropped a link in the chat to our feedback for this session. So everybody, please click that. And then Maria Elena,
Yeah.
give us a thought.
I'm curious, Paulina and Cynthia, what impacts did you see in your community action plan process based on the devastations that our communities faced? Did anything surface?
That's a hard question for me because I just started working on the community action plan last year. I did read the former one when I was applying for the position. And honestly, I was a little surprised at how much there was a focus on co-ed because it's supposed to be like a separate entity. But it was sort of being reported on as though it was like their main response. And so that's something I wanted to look at to update. But I don't know, was there already emergency response as one of the categories in the community action plan, or was that added after all these disasters?
I don't know. I don't know, but I'm curious in the community assessment if anything came up from the folks that you interacted with.
It's just, I feel like disasters are sort of like, we feel like we live and breathe it right now in Sonoma County. And so it's like, it's always part of it, but it's hard to have a conversation without having that context. Like we've been dealing with nonstop since 2017 because it was every other year and then the pandemic. And so especially for the vulnerable populations that were disproportionately impacted, right? So that does come up a lot everywhere.
Yeah, for us, definitely our community action, you know, the timing around when we were planning and launching our community action survey was right around the time that the floods had just happened. So that must have been early 2023. And in fact, I do, because I refer to our community action plan for a lot of data and just information, but I want to, you know, just read off of really quickly some of the just because I happen to have it in front of me. The flood impacts that resulted from what some of the respondents said, right? As we had shared, you know, many had been evacuated, were displaced. They didn't have enough funding to relocate. Their homes were damaged, or some of them lost their homes completely. Not only did they lose income, but they also were, you know, they lost their jobs because many of them work in agriculture. the season was not able to start on time. Many of them continue to not have full hours of work. And so some of them, shared, for example, these are just some quotes that, the floods are affecting us due to the fact that a ton of strawberries went bad. This is our only source of income. The floods, because of the floods, there is no work. Work is delayed. I have always worked in the field for 18 years now. I don't know how I'm going to do it. And these are families that, I did have a slide very quickly that showed some of the income, and it isn't surprising, but it's disheartening to continue to see that our farm worker community, our low-income community, is in the lowest threshold. A lot of the respondents that participated in our survey, many 26% of them are making less than between 10,000 to 20,000 annual income, right? 10% of them between 5 and 10,000, and 20% of them less than $5,000 a year. And so I don't know, there's still a lot of conversation. I know Maria Elena's involved in a lot of the advocacy post floods, and our community continues to feel the impact. These programs statewide that we can continue to advocate for are one-time economic assistance, and they're not enough. And so as statewide CalCAPA, what can we do to continue to advocate for programs that target communities that have no safety nets? And in our case, it's the communities that we serve who are undocumented. I think that we need to continue to uplift and bring that to the conversation, because there is no opportunity for them for any FEMA disaster relief, for any unemployment, for any of the safety nets that we know as community can help someone, just get back on track.
Paulina, I think that that's a very powerful note to end on. Clearly, this is an ongoing conversation for community action, for CalCAPA, and how we participate, how each and every one of our agencies participate in these efforts for our communities. We know them best, right? So I'm happy to hear the leadership that we're demonstrating and that model exists. So thank you, Cynthia, Maria Elena, Paulina, for your participation and letting us know how your agencies do that. We hope that others will learn a little bit on the recording of this. And we look forward to our next opportunity to talk about this topic with the community action community in California. It will come this summer. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today. Look forward to your feedback, and we'll see you at the next one.
Well done. Well done, folks. Well done.
Bye. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.